Are you looking for an easy step-by-step guide to make your first acrylic pour? Welcome back, guys. This is G, and in our last video I showed you how to mix your acrylic paints, and I showed you how to check for paint consistency using the drip test. So if you haven't seen that, check that out here. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you 3 super easy techniques to make your first acrylic pour painting. And if you watch the video until the end, I'll also show you how to varnish your painting using a liquid or spray varnish. So we're going to want to start by mixing up a batch of paint. And if you saw the previous video on paint consistency, we're going for somewhere roughly in the middle. If you haven't seen that video, check that out here. It'll be very useful for you before you start pouring. I'm going to be using the acrylic polymer varnish that's available to me, but as you can see on the video, my varnish is much thicker than the varnish you would be using in the US or Canada or Europe. So what you'll see me do is water it down to sort of resemble the consistency that you have. So what you want to start with is 1 part paint and 2 parts varnish, and then we'll only use water from there to water it down. And after I'm stirring it in, I'll give you a good sense of the consistency using by looking at the mound that comes down the stream. So for the colors, I'm going to have one just be straight titanium white, and then I'm going to use this dark green and cyan blue also with white to brighten them up a little. I don't want them to set as dark as they normally do. And all of these paints are opaque, and these techniques generally work best with opaque paints. Anything that isn't opaque, especially if it's more on the transparent side, will almost disappear under the opaque paints. So let's quickly look at the consistency. You see how the mound disappears back into the paint when it comes off the stick in about a second? That's sort of the consistency you want to go for. It should form a mound coming off the stick on the surface of the paint, but it shouldn't take longer than a second for that mound to sink in. If it's taking 2 to 3 seconds, just add maybe 10 to 15 drops of water. It'll get you to the right consistency. Now, essentially, all the paints are going to be mixed this way. At the end, I weighed this. Each cup of this paint weighed about 160 grams. So now we're ready to sort of layer the paints in the cup. We have a batch of titanium white, cyan blue with white, and green with some white. And what we're going to do is we're going to order them in the cup. For the first 2, we're going to go blue, green, white, and then repeat. So this first one we'll use for the very first technique, the second one for the second, and then we'll introduce silicone oil into the third. But because I only want it in the third one, we're not adding it to the cup with the colors now. So here we go. Here's the cup for the second technique. Same order: blue, green, then white, and then repeat. You want to tilt your cup to the side a little. You don't want the paint to go straight down into the paint. Now for the techniques that we're going to be attempting, the first one is going to be the ring pour. The ring pour, sometimes also referred to as the triggering pour, gets its namesake from the circular patterns that come from gently stirring the cup as the stream falls down onto the painting. It is one of the most straightforward techniques, does not use any cell additives like silicone oil, so therefore will not require cleanup when you want to varnish it. So this is our first technique. See how it has nice, well-defined lines between the colors? That's attained by having a thick recipe of paint. The second technique I want to talk about is also very easy and is called the ribbon pour. The ribbon pour also comes out of a cup. We will stack the colors in exactly the same way as we did in the previous example. The difference here is we won't make a circular motion while we're pouring. Instead, we will kind of haphazardly wave our hands around to create the ribbon patterns that you see on the canvas. Then as you spread this pattern around, you'll notice these really cool shapes start to form and expand. So there you go, that's the ribbon pour. The last example we're going to look at is a personal favorite and is a favorite for many beginners, the flip cup. Now, in this particular example, we're going to be adding a drop of silicone oil to two of the colors and leaving one without, so we can add that color first and last into the cup to make sure that we don't have silicone directly touching our canvas. This is because silicone is an oil that doesn't really dry, so it touching the canvas means it will repel the paint on top of it, creating a little crater, and that usually looks ugly. Look at how gorgeous those cells are. And this is basically why the flip cup is such a popular technique. It's so easy to get these really cool results with this one technique. You notice that I used a small lighter. You can use that or a small torch. And now it's time to talk about varnishing. Varnishing is much less intimidating than people make it seem. And I'm going to show you two very easy ways to varnish, using a spray kind and using a liquid kind. So first, let's talk about the spray kind. There's honestly many options that you can use for spray varnishes. You just need to know that spray varnishes, the majority of them, whether something like engine enamel or the oil paint varnishes, they're all oil-based. And the technique is essentially going from side to side at a set angle and checking the surface against the light to see that it's uniform. Finally, do bear in mind that spray varnishes are a little bit toxic. You do not want to be inhaling this stuff, so be in a well-ventilated space. And now let's talk about the liquid kind of varnish. So with water-based varnishes, honestly, I prefer to just water them down a little and apply them straight out of a cup, like you would if you were making a base layer on a pour. This is, I find, the most foolproof way to have no marks in your varnish. But it is definitely worth noting that this is not the most cost-effective way to use a varnish, because I am clearly using way more than I would need if I was using a brush. So while we look at the dry results of the varnish, I just want to point out that you should wait for the paint to fully cure before you do varnish, and that means well beyond the point where it's dry to the touch. It takes up to 2 to 3 weeks depending on the weather and where you are in the world. But you should also know that a fresh coat of paint on a fresh new canvas or a fresh coat of gesso will always dry better than pouring over an old pour. So for maximum best results in terms of drying, it's always best to work on a fresh canvas, or at the very least a fresh coat of gesso covering up whatever it was before, just so the paint has a nice gripping surface to stick to uniformly. And that was it, guys. If you're interested in learning slightly more advanced techniques, I recommend this video. It'll show you a technique called the bloom. It is very interesting and you're going to enjoy it a lot if you're feeling up for a challenge. See you guys in the next video.